I'm Adam Reilly. Tonight on Greater Boston, partial shutdowns on the T, assaults on bus drivers, and proposals to make fares affordable for everyone. GBH News transportation reporter Bob Seay breaks it all down and answers your questions about the T. Then best-selling author Celeste Ng joins me on her work in the new collaborative novel 14 Days, co-written by Margaret Atwood, John Grisham, Dave Eggers, R.L. Stine, and more than 30 other authors. And finally, climate disasters have inspired climate literature, and Harvard's one of several universities now teaching a course on it. Is it worth the cost of tuition? Well, yet again, parts of the red line are shut down this week, and parts of the green and orange lines will be out of commission over the next few weeks. MBTA General Manager Philip Ng says the shutdowns are allowing for much-needed repairs that'll make sure the T works in the long run. But there's still a major source of frustration for riders who have some questions about what is going on. GBH News transportation reporter Bob Seay joins me now to answer some of those. Bob, we'll get to the shutdowns in just a moment, but right before you and I started having this conversation, you shared with me that there's some big news out of Boston where Mayor Michelle Wu has announced an extension of the free bus program operating in the city. How big a deal is this?
I think it's a pretty big deal because when she first started this 2 years ago, I think she was hoping that eventually there'd be such support at the success of this program that somehow the state or the MBTA might pick up the cost. Well, she waited to the very last minute and today announced that the city will pick up the cost, which is about $8 million for 2 years. And it will pay the MBTA, reimburse the MBTA for bus service on routes 23, 28, and 29.
Where do those routes go?
They go through the Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury part of the city where there are a lot of lower income people who really depend on the bus to get to work, among other things.
Okay, and we should mention this is being funded with federal funds, right?
Right.
American, I'm going to blank on
the ARPA funds.
Yeah, ARPA. Let's stick with ARPA funds.
America Rescue Plan funds. Yeah, she announced today that that's going to pay for it. So this is a great step forward. Of course, Mayor Wu is really big on not having fares at all for the T, and that may be a bit unrealistic, but I think she's been very strategic in terms of targeting the routes that really have riders who need the help.
Well, it'll be interesting to see after this latest extension plays out if maybe someone else is convinced to fund it or if it goes away. There is a push by the T to expand, not free fares, but to expand the existing reduced fare program for individuals and families. Why is this something the T is looking at?
They have been looking at this for almost 10 years. This has been, thought about, planned, hoped for. Advocates have really pushed for it. And we're finally at the point now where Governor Healey's support and the MBTA is behind this program, which will give riders generally a 50% discount if they qualify.
And that would be, tell me if I have these numbers right, if you're an individual making up to about $30,000, you'd get a half-price discount. And if you're a family of 4 making up to about 60, same deal, right?
And the important part about this is it's not just the T, it's not just the subway. It's also the buses, it's also commuter rail, which is a huge change, because commuter rail, even though we all traditionally think of it serving wealthier suburban commuters, it actually is a tremendously important link for gateway cities, where there are a lot of lower income working people, and they can have to spend $300 to $400 a month.
It's not cheap.
No,
I used to take it to work before I realized I just couldn't make it work with work. It's a lot of money.
That is, and then add parking onto that.
So this has only been floated right now. What will it take for the T's plans to expand reduced fares to become a reality?
Well, it's more than just floated. It's really to the point now where they're having public hearings as we speak. In March, at the March MBTA board meeting, they'll be voting on it, and I predict they will approve it, and it will begin to roll out in the spring and summer. So this is moving along pretty quickly.
There are a bunch of shutdowns, as I mentioned at the outset of this segment, a bunch of shutdowns currently going on. We went downtown and heard from one woman, Mary from Dorchester, who's hoping that you can shed some light on what's happening with the Red Line in particular. Let's take a look at Mary's question and concern.
My question would be, how are the improvements on the Red Line going? I've been able to ride on some of the new trains, which have been wonderful, but there still seems to be some delays that affect my commuting to work.
Okay, you got good news for Mary. Those Red Line shutdowns are underway right now, right?
Yes, and we had some last year in the fall, south of Park Street toward Braintree.
And now it's up like Alewife to
right now
Harvard,
we're north of Park Street, and so what's happening is these, what I call the great reconstruction of the T is taking place in segments and pieces. So people will see some parts of some lines shut down part of the time, and others that'll be opened up. But eventually, the aim is to remove all of the slow zones. The recent Green Line shutdown, which lasted actually a pretty long time, resulted in about 16 speed restrictions being lifted. The goal now with the latest Red Line shutdown is 53 speed restrictions to be lifted.
That's a lot of speed restrictions.
That's a lot. Right.
All right, so it's Red Line underway right now with then Orange Line shutdowns and Green Line shutdowns to come. Your phrase, the great reconstruction of the T, it is compelling, but it also makes me wonder at what point, because we've had so many shutdowns for so long, at what point might the great reconstruction of the T be wrapped up? The
end of this year, according
to
Phil Ng. Yes, he has pledged to eliminate all speed restrictions by the end of 2024.
Huh, I had missed that, and that's
we'll hold him to it and see if he comes through.
A lot of people will be very happy if that happens, as you know better than me. All right, I want to close by asking about a more downbeat topic, I think. The T is mounting a push to get people to help them keep track of assaults on bus drivers, and we've got a little snippet from Instagram that shows how this campaign is working and what this campaign is predicated on. Let's take a quick look.
I've been with the T for about 19 years. A few years back, I was on the 16th route and somebody spat on me. Being a bus operator, you try to do the best that you can. You try to de-escalate it at the most, but you have to make the best out of it, honestly, but it can definitely be challenging.
How big a problem is this? I assume it's pretty big since the T is mounting a new PR campaign. And by the way, I should mention what they want to do is they want to get people to use an app. Tell me, it's the MBTA See Something, Say Something app or See and Say app to fill in details if they witness something going on that shouldn't. But how big an issue is this?
Well, it's a national issue. So the Federal Transit Administration is actually requiring a lot of transit agencies to start documenting assaults, how they're dealing with them, because even though there may be relatively few physical assaults, there's a lot of verbal assaults that drivers have to put up with. And most of these happen when people are trying to pay their fares or not pay their fares. So the idea of having a fare-free bus, some of the routes, eliminates that conflict right off the bat. But it also is, you can imagine you're driving a bus, which is really challenging in the city, and you've got somebody hassling you, and you're trying to pay attention to what you're doing. It's extremely unsafe. So it's a really important campaign. Now, the number of assaults have been steadily dropping a bit, but it's still something that the T wants the public to get involved in. They want to engage the ridership to report whatever they see.
I think you told me that the assaults had peaked, was it 2021, right after?
I think it was fall of 2022. I was trying to read it, and it really was like a kind of a peak, and then it dropped down. I don't know why.
Well, I think you and I had chatted a little bit on the phone earlier today. I think you had mentioned that this was right after COVID.
Yes.
When we sort of saw, I mean, I see it as someone who, for better or worse, has to drive into work. People have decided to just ignore traffic signals. Red lights are now optional. They're like the equivalent of a stop sign. So maybe, just throwing this out, maybe it was pointing out the extent to which people became desocialized during COVID.
Yeah, there was definitely an increase in rude behavior. Let's put it that way.
I spoke over you. I was going to say, I cannot imagine trying to navigate a bus through dense Boston area traffic under the best of circumstances.
Right.
And if you were doing it dealing with abuse or being fearful that you might be either just given a hard time verbally or assaulted physically by the people you were conveying, it'd be terrible.
And also the T is trying to hire more bus drivers.
Yeah.
So the more word spreads that it's dangerous or, you know, that's a disincentive. So I think they're trying to, as our other transit agencies, mount an aggressive campaign to target people who may be abusive to drivers.
Well, I got to say, I hope it works out, and I hope those numbers continue to drop, because that's just completely unnecessary. All right, Bob C., thank you for talking this through. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam.
And if you've got questions for Bob on anything transportation related, please send them our way at greaterboston@wgbh.org, or you can send them to Bob on X, aka Twitter. He's at BobWGBH, or in the comments below if you happen to be watching on YouTube. You may have read books by John Grisham, Margaret Atwood, Dave Eggers, and R.L. Stine, but you can now read one book by all four of them and more than 30 other authors. It's called 14 Days, a collaborative novel, and all proceeds will go to the Authors Guild Foundation. I'm joined now by one of the authors and a member of the Guild, Cambridge's Celeste Ng, who's also written 3 New York Times bestsellers, including Little Fires Everywhere, which became a limited series with Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. Celeste Ng, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me in.
So can you explain the conceit of this new book? What is a collaborative novel?
Well, this is a new thing that we're trying. The idea really came during the COVID pandemic. The story is about a bunch of people who are living together in an apartment building in New York when COVID hits and the lockdown begins. And to get a little space from their apartments, a little time away from their families, they go upstairs onto the roof, as people often do in the city, and they start talking and telling stories and getting to know each other. And that's the premise of the book.
And these are people who are not capable of getting out of the city, right?
Exactly.
Everyone who's been able to get out has left, and they're stuck here.
Exactly, and they're all stuck behind.
It's reminded me, when I started reading it, the first thing that it reminded me of was the Canterbury Tales, just the way you've got people in proximity going through a communal experience, but then telling stories that point up different parts of their own individual experience prior to this event. Is that a fair comparison to make?
I think it is, and that was what I thought of when they pitched the idea to me, the idea that there's a bunch of strangers who were thrown together somewhat unexpectedly and are now in the position of trying to get to know each other. And of course, the stories that they tell are always going to say something about themselves as well as the situations that they're in.
You write in this book about a character who's referred to as the therapist, and the therapist spins her story pretty early in the book. Did you create that character, or did the people who organized this effort have an array of possible characters for authors to write about, and did you pick the therapist? How did that work?
They were incredibly supportive. They said, if you want ideas, we're happy to brainstorm. But the therapist was a character that I'd had kind of knocking around in my head for a little while. She had this story and she had this voice, and in particular her grandmother, who's part of the story, has this voice. And I didn't really know what to do with them. They didn't fit into any of the projects that I was working on. And so when the opportunity came up here to give them a space, I went, oh, this might be perfect. The idea was that we were all supposed to contribute stories like we might tell at a party. You know, everybody's got sort of that story they like to tell about their uncle or the time they went to this concert or whatever happened. That was the kind of story that I had, and I'm so glad they found a way to work it in.
I don't want to give away too much here, but I'm hoping I can get you to read a little bit from the section involving the therapist. I should mention, just by way of a preface, and I don't know what page. Do you want to start cracking it open as I give people a little bit of background? The therapist describes a scheme that her grandmother has, which she picked up from a friend of hers who she plays bingo with, for placing extremely effective curses on people. Before you read the portion where the therapist puts a curse on her ex, what is the scheme that the grandmother teaches her to use?
The scheme is that you write the person's full name on a little slip of paper, you roll it up and you freeze it in an ice cube and you put it in the back of the freezer and you leave it there. I think this was an anecdote that I maybe had seen people talking about on Twitter or, something like that.
I was wondering where it came from, yeah.
I'd never heard of anything like that, but immediately my imagination got fired up and started thinking, oh, who might do this? This is something the grandmother learns from a friend of hers, so it's sort of not even a tradition, it's maybe a borrowed tradition. And the grandmother in the story uses this to help out her granddaughters in certain ways.
Could you read the couple paragraphs where the therapist says, it's really no good arguing with my grandmother, so I decided to give it a shot, and here's what happened?
Sure. I didn't feel I had anything to lose, and anyway, arguing with Appa was usually a losing battle. So I recited Alex's full name, that's her ex, first, middle, last, right down to the third. And she wrote it on a piece of paper and told me she'd pop it into the ice cube tray as soon as we hung up. And wouldn't you know it, a month later, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-friend cheated on Alex with his sister. And now they were a serious thing. And a week or so after that, I saw pictures of her 3-carat engagement ring on Facebook.
That, by the way, I should mention to anyone watching, is not the shocking.
No,
that's not the shocking.
That's not the reveal.
It's not that the curse works. It's something else that you'll have to pick up the book and read it to learn more about. Were you aware of what your fellow collaborative authors were creating as you worked on your section of this?
No, and that was actually part of the fun of the project. I don't know if you've ever played that game in school or an art class where somebody draws something on one piece of paper and then they fold it over and then somebody else draws another piece, and at the end you kind of unfold it. That's sort of what happened here. We each sent in our stories and we got to see how Doug Preston wove them all into sort of one narrative.
Did he have to do, the editor, did he have to do a lot of work to weave them into one narrative? Do you know how much editing effort was required?
I don't. I would guess, though, that it was a lot because I feel like he did a great job of making these characters from all these disparate pieces that many different writers put together. And at least for me as a reader, it comes out fairly seamlessly. There's one narrator who's telling the whole story, who's the super of the building, and she kind of holds it together. But since every character has their own voice, each person's story gets to shine. I'm
not done with the book. I'm still working my way through the book.
We won't have any spoilers.
Which we should mention, it just came out today, so that's my semi-excuse, although I had an advanced copy. And it really does seem to be cohesive. It feels like, it doesn't feel like a disjointed creation. I'm wondering if you and maybe any of your fellow co-authors who you've compared notes with thought it might be a sell to get people to pick up a book which starts by bringing us back to a period which a lot of people would like to forget about.
Yeah, it's tricky. Right now, I think there are a lot of books coming out that are directly talking about COVID. Michael Cunningham, for example, has a new novel out, and it takes place during COVID. Ann Patchett, who's a really well-known, very successful writer, her most recent novel also technically takes place during COVID. And they touch on COVID somewhat lightly in some places and somewhat much more concertedly in others. But I am hoping that we're starting to be at a time where we're able to start processing what happened. I think that as a society, we really haven't dealt with what happened. We haven't sort of looked at our grief. We haven't really tried to figure out what we can make of that experience that we went through, that we're still going through. And so I'm hopeful that people are ready to pick this up. It is a book that takes place during COVID, but it's also largely, I think, about the need to find connection, even at the times where, the world, it feels like, is trying to keep you away from the people you love. That
brings us to the next question that I've got for you, which to me is a huge question. COVID obviously took a horrific human toll. But your book, this book that you've written with your co-authors, it's a reminder that time also opened up a sense of possibilities existing that we hadn't necessarily known were there before COVID happened. I'm wondering if you personally, as someone who's engaged in this project and been thinking about COVID and what it means, do you think that we collectively as a society have retained that sense of altered possibilities as the pandemic has receded, or have we kind of forgotten?
I would like to believe that we've held on to that. I think maybe I'm an optimist at heart. I would like to believe that, the spirit in which people were trying to be kinder to each other, to give each other grace, when we were, being extra kind to delivery workers and mail carriers, when we were, recognizing the huge sacrifices that first responders make, that, teachers were making to try and teach online. I would like us to hold on to that. I don't know if we are. I think the world that we're in right now has a lot of big problems and a lot of things that pull our attention away from each other, and a lot of reasons for people to be afraid. But maybe this book and the others that are coming out can be part of reminding us that, when people are together, when there's a human connection, many more things are possible.
It's a good reminder to get, because when I think back on that time, as horrible as it was on a number of levels, what I think about primarily is how close it made my family. And I wouldn't say that my family is not close now, but there was a real intensity, a wonderful, warm intensity on that level, which I miss, and which I'd like to remember is out there as a possibility. I'm curious, was there anyone, you've obviously been writing at and being read at a very high level for a while now, was there anyone who you collaborated with on this project that you just personally got a huge kick out of being involved with?
Well, there's so many writers in here that I admire. I was reading R.L. Stine's stuff when I was a kid. I've got friends whose pieces are in here, and I love seeing everything they do. I learned so much from them. Mira Jacob, for example, Tommy Orange. But I will say that to get the initial email from Margaret Atwood to say, hey, we're thinking of putting this together, would you like to be part of it? I was just sort of in awe. I thought, I got an email from Margaret Atwood. She's a literary hero of mine and so many others. And so it was a thrill to feel like we were working on something together.
Yeah, that's a big email to get. Just briefly, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what should people know about the Authors Guild of America and the work it does?
It's important to know that the Authors Guild is really supporting authors. They are working to fight against book bans, for example, and to support the freedom to read, which is hugely undersold. Even here in Massachusetts, there are book bans and pressures on libraries and teachers. They're also working to protect authors' rights as we start to see how AI is moving into the world of publishing, to make sure that authors' works aren't just essentially pirated and fed into AI databases and used without their consent. So they're doing a lot of work, I think, to make sure that voices get heard and that really human stories are protected.
All right, Celeste Ng, thank you for coming in and talking about this really fascinating project.
Thank you so much for having me in.
The book, again, is 14 Days, and it's available right now. Natural disasters are fueling a growing interest in literature about climate change. Harvard University is among a growing number of schools offering classes about that new genre. Are they worth the cost of tuition? GBH News' Kirk Carapezza went to Harvard to find out.
Extreme weather events like wildfires and floods are contributing to a rise in climate anxiety.
What is freshwater access going to be like? Is there going to be wildfires threatening my home and family? It makes me think about my future.
My word's climate self, and it's the part of you that is fully aware, entangled, and reckoning with the reality of climate change.
We're heading back to school, and that school is Harvard University, where students are taking a new course this year. It's called Climate Change Literature.
When students talk about books that they're reading or questions that they're grappling with, a lot of these questions and ideas have to do with climate change. And so I thought it would be exciting to have a course that focused just on the novels and the poems and the essays that are really tackling this subject head on.
I think for a lot of people my age, it feels inescapable that we have to think about these questions. So I thought that a climate change literature class would help me understand better how we're changing the way we think about the environment.
There is this undercurrent of anxiety about things you do, actions you take, what does this mean in the broader context? It's a difficult balance to strike, because I think not thinking about it means that there's a level of privilege that I have that it's not coming up for me every single day.
According to researchers at Yale, 30% of Americans are very worried about climate change, and 13% think it's already too late to do anything about it. And with universities trying to address the mental health crisis around climate change, courses like this one are popping up across the country, just as skepticism about the value of a four-year college degree grows.
So programs in the environmental humanities are popping up across the US and Canada. These courses and programs are increasingly more common mainly because of the climate crisis. This is one of the main growth areas right now in the humanities.
What makes a good environmental humanities course?
It's really a course that centers environmental justice and, crucially, solutions.
To be in a space where we're not only just recognizing it, but we're talking about solutions, we're talking about people who have thought about it through literature, it makes me feel like, okay, there is hope. There is a group of people who sort of are willing to fight for a better future. Just being in that presence of community means everything to me.
Skeptics, though, question whether students enrolled in these courses are actually learning the hard skills to land a job without significant background in science.
Well, I think it's fabulous that people are waking up to the concerns about the environment. There's going to be a lot of careers built on this, but most of those careers are going to require more than having read something about it. It's going to require some science background. It's going to require understanding how to use what we've learned to make an impact.
Something that I've been trying to seek out is a really strong balance between like my STEM courses and my humanities courses, just because climate change is so nuanced.
My word is Iago. It's a noun and it's a compound between Sanskrit and Dhamma, and it means the destruction of self at the hands of climate change and natural disaster.
I do think it's important to be able to name something that is happening. Being able to be precise about language and being precise about those terms is going to help us achieve efficient solutions.
I mean, this is preparing me for life. Because we are going to encounter climate disaster, and all of the engineers and the scientists, they're telling us this. But we can't respond to disaster with numbers. We need to understand how to communicate with each other, how to respond in a way that would actually be productive, and the science obviously isn't doing that for us.
I think in history, if you look at large movements and what has really sparked change, it's art, it's people who speak, it's leaders, it's people who are moved by ideas. You generate this sort of mass involvement and interest in a really important social movement, and without it, it would stay insular. But to have a better world that's for everyone, you need everyone's voice, you need everyone's interest.
You do not want to offer up any sort of hollow optimism or sort of a naive sense of hope. I think our students these days are too smart for that. Having a discussion-based class where they are able to really, really grapple with some of their intense fears or their questions together. I wouldn't say it provides a sense of hope. I would say it does provide a sense of solidarity or a sense of connection that makes them feel less alone.
My word is catastrophehood, which is a particular community that forms in the wake of disaster. So it's a community that has a particularly tight-knit bond that a community that forms in any other circumstance might not.
Would you describe this class as a catastrophehood?
Ooh, it is a certain kind of catastrophehood for sure.
That is it for tonight, but do come back tomorrow. Massport's looking for a new CEO, and East Boston activists want a say in who gets picked. And then the owner of Baked by Melissa joins me on her new Seaport pop-up, her new cookbook, and what she's got in store for Valentine's Day. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Every year,